So we'll start, because yours was shown first. I want to talk to you guys first. This film seems to have been a long time in the making, since there's footage going back to the beginning of Doria's efforts to do this.
Exactly, yeah. It was started between...
You can take your mask off while you're up here.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it was started between 2000 and 2002.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and you were working on it all that time?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't seem old enough.
No, I was like in middle school in 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I picked it up around 2018.
Okay, so who was making the film before that?
I was.
You were working on it first?
Yeah, and actually the executive producer, Howard Bowler, who is here, who was my husband at the time, I would say, but he saw the story first in a local newspaper in New Jersey. It was a big feature about the ways that African Americans had lost land, and some of the systemic reasons of why there was so much black land loss. And Doria's story was featured in the newspaper at the time. So we contacted her and thought that it would be worth exploring deeper her story and what had happened. And she was in the process of trying to reconnect with family members and piecing the story together for herself as well. So we started, kind of documenting that process. And it was kind of the story of also, making a documentary in America too, where, can be costly. There was a lot of travel involved, and I was working pretty independently at the time. So I worked for very long periods on it and collected, lots of really great interviews, interesting interviews with both some folks who were closely connected to the issue. But then, and then years later, we kind of resurrected the footage, and Tiffany did an incredible job just reconstituting it and putting together this narrative that, really wove all of the important details together. And unfortunately, Doria was not with us to kind of see the final product, but I really have to hand it to Hobo Films and Tiffany for doing a great job.
So Tiffany, how did you get involved on it?
So Howard and I had been friends for a while, and then after I was working in advertising for about 10 years, and working with Hobo Audio, which is the audio company that Howard owns. And then when I was but I was making films on the side in my downtime all those years. And then when I finally was like, I'm jumping ship, I'm gonna go just make films, Howard was like, well, I want to make films too. And so he asked me to come on board at Hobo Audio, and we worked on as we are transitioning from Hobo Audio to Hobo Films, we worked on a TV pilot together, and that has made its way around the festival circuit and everything. And then he was like, well, I have all this footage, from this documentary that we started. You want to take a look at it and see if you can finish it and stuff? And so I looked at the footage and I was like, wow, this is a crazy story. And then he also told me that, around that time Doria had just passed away, and he wanted to make sure that we finished it in her honor. And so I just looked at all of these mini DV tapes of footage and then tried to figure out how to craft this into one narrative story. So then I took all of that footage, and then I asked Howard if he could send me down to South Carolina to get some more B-roll, modernized B-roll. And then I interweaved that modern B-roll with the footage that was shot in the early 2000s. And
well, it worked out perfectly. It seemed perfectly integrated and fit together.
Thank you.
So there was more editing to be done after she was looking at the first footage. You were doing more editing on it together?
Well, Tiffany consulted with me a bit as she was putting the film together. So there was, a collaborative effort there. But they did, shoot this really beautiful drone footage, at the site of his property, and did a great job just bringing to life some of those scenes that.
No, I think that it was really, really well done, and it's a great story to be told.
Thank you.
To piece it together, and really just some stories that need to be told get told. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the way that you started it, and then it's kind of not there, and then it's coming back, and so when the story is right, and the creators will come and tell it. And I think you've done a beautiful job there. So
thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And the way that it ties in with that other film is just remarkable, and terrifying, of course.
For sure.
Yeah.
I was reminded. I wrote down this, but then you see it in the last film. One of the newspaper headlines, the subhead said, "Thrilling story of mob violence on Anthony Crawford's lynching." It's a thrilling story. It's not a thrilling story. It's a horrific story.
It's horrific,
but the way it's being told is very much like the postcards. It's like, wow, it's a great event. How cool is this?
Right.
So it's just absolutely horrifying, and I'm really glad you bring it to our attention, and that Doria did what she did, because
she was
that's,
an
at the end of the day, that's
person.
a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I want to give Cade an opportunity to talk a little bit here about the other film, At What Cost. In some ways, it seems like this is a documentary that's about the making of a documentary.
Yeah, in a lot of ways it is, because for us as the students, being so close to it and still mourning and grieving and figuring out how to heal our losses, I think ultimately we found while making the documentary that, we don't have the answers, but we have the ability to raise awareness of what's going on our campus and many, many campuses across the country and the world, and just the general mental health crisis that we're experiencing. And so the decision to include Lauren's narrative of making the documentary in it was something that we went back and forth on a lot. But ultimately we felt, because she had experienced her own experiences with suicide, depression, that it was a powerful way to bring the audience into the story and to ground it in the reality of it, that this is a student crew making a documentary about our friends that we lost. We felt that was important.
No, I think it held together really well in terms of the narrative, because it starts out with him being accepted to film school. So we put ourselves in the milieu right away. Yeah. And then as soon as we're in the milieu, we're out of it, because he's deceased and his father's reaction is there. And now it's piecing together everybody else's reaction to that, and then the increased number of deaths, and how do people respond. And it became a very personal, going from person to person. And so while you're making the documentary, it's also, at the end of the time, it becomes this story of what are the responses, what are their answers, how can we deal with this, don't want to talk about it, can't talk about it, and which was talked about in the first film. It's like, it's too horrific to talk about. This is the only way we can heal, is by not talking about it.
Sure.
Certainly World War II veterans, a lot of them never spoke about, so they didn't know about PTSD, but they just never could talk about it, and that's the only way they could go forward. So dealing with that, and the reactions. And at the end, it seemed that there was a sort of an answer in that prayer, and it was good that the circular nature of it, the investigating that was going on in the making of the film, and how do we do this, what do we do, very personal, and then to communicate to the father the prayer that had been written, and the message being, we need to know we're not alone. We need to know that people care about us, even if they're not checking in on us as we hope they would. And then we need to make sure we do check in on people and see who's at risk and who's not at risk and how's anybody doing. It's sort of remarkable in this instance that there's a story in the New York Times today about a website that has all the earmarks of a regular social media platform that you can log on to if you're in despair, and it will show you how to kill yourself.
Wow.
They're saying it's being considered responsible for a number of young suicides. And that there seems to be very little hope of shutting it down. A lot of the material that's on there is not allowed on other sites on the internet.
Right.
But if you look at today's New York Times, you'll see that it's there on the front page. But it goes to this crisis that we have, and I think that the fact that film students wanted to make some kind of a response to this and make a documentary, and it became this own investigation not only of filmmaking but of individual stories. It was a really beautiful thing. So
thank you. Yeah, I think all three of these films are testaments to how issues in the past are still carrying on today, and like you said, with that technology, it's you know, it's a scary world. But when we have institutions like, for example, USC, that have the resources to help their students, you know, I think for us the greatest impact this film made was having, you know, more counselors put in place for students. And Marcus Anderson, the academic advisor, who was actually my academic advisor, you know, he is hyper aware now of these issues because of his involvement in the film. And for us, we're really proud that we could help sort of move the needle just a little bit closer to helping our students and our friends cope with not only their own mental problems and their own struggles, but also like destigmatizing it and just letting the conversation be a conversation rather than be behind closed doors where no one's, you know, sharing their own personal experiences or anything like that. And so yeah, I think we still have a long way to go to figure out, you know, how to help people the best. But through making this documentary, we hope to just open that door just a little bit more.
yeah, well, I think in both cases, although very different films, we're bringing attention to things that need to be brought into the open and to be talked about. And as in the efforts in the last film, to turn the postcards around to make them anti-lynching is to say these are not anonymous, undifferentiated black bodies. These are people who had lives. They are not objects of party favors. This is something else.
Right.
And so, and to have the conversation, to make the conversation, because that's all we need to do, and more. And to the point of the USC film, you know, COVID has isolated people even more, and that was a good distinction that was made in the beginning of the film. These are people that were online only pre-COVID, and so the online only existence comes with a lot of issues. And then the irony is, in a lot of the making of the film, it's recorded Zoom, it's recorded virtual conversations.
Yeah, we made this film last fall. We actually finished the film probably about a year ago. To the date, and we made the film completely over Zoom, which was an unforgettable experience, both good and bad. But you know, it challenged us as filmmakers to not only be there for each other, you know, across the screen, but to find new ways to make things work, to get what we needed to get. And I'm really proud of our whole crew for doing what had to be done, because there were so many moments where it was frustrating. We couldn't go on campus at all. We couldn't have access to certain people because of you know, restrictions. And our DP Cal would drive around all of LA, going to all of our different subjects' house and set the camera up in the back, then run out to his car and get on Zoom with us and figure out everything. Oh, wow. So yeah, the whole Zoom of it all was really just fascinating, and really pushed us to be like the most creative possible. And yeah, it was a wonderful experience.
Well, it was a good experience for all of us too. And I would say we had a director yesterday for a really powerful film that I hope you get to see, GSW, Gunshot Wound. And she had to do the last directing of it remotely by Zoom, and she says, I never want to direct by Zoom ever again, because having to do that. So I think we have time for a couple of questions if we have any. Okay, right there in the middle.
What are the plans for your two films for distribution, and to what audiences do you want to show your films?
So I'll go with you.
I would love anyone who wants to take it. I will. Well, we do have an agent that is trying to get it out to Netflix and, you know, the different distribution platforms. So, I mean, if you know anyone, I'll. But yeah.
Is there a website for the film?
We can. Well, is it just on our Howard? Would it just be on our Hobo Films website?
And it's
yeah.
streaming now also on
Yes.
QandA TV.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but if you go to Hobo Films,
Hobofilms.org. Yeah, hobofilms.org talks about like the Crawford film as well as some other films we're working on.
Okay.
But like Carol said, there is a streaming service called QandA TV, so you can find it on there as well.
okay.
Yeah.
And what about you, Katie?
And for us, we're just still running through the festival circuit, but very similar answer to them. You know, and we're open to many different distribution platforms, and we just want to make sure it finds the right home.
And is it being, is it part of sort of USC, not only archives, but is it being shown to incoming students and things like that? I mean, is there a way for it to be distributed there?
Yeah, in the community itself, there's definitely like this bigger awareness that this film is out there, and I don't think they're necessarily like putting, you know, like auditoriums of students like to watch it, but I think like it's sort of just spreading through the community on social media, and a lot of the people that were in the film are still at the school, so we're trying to just show it to as many people as we can.
Which is great. Anyone up here?
Yeah, I have a question about the Crawford property. And you said the story in the newspaper kind of got your interest in the project going.
Yeah.
And in the film, it said that that property is now owned by a paper company.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if there's any push for the family to be compensated for that property.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, that's a good question. I did speak with a real estate, a scholar of a historian who also specializes in his real estate, and the ways that properties were often taken from families like that, there was kind of a modicum of legality to it. The bank ended up being able to take possession of the land because Crawford might have had a couple of outstanding mortgages that were very small, and he often financed his farming enterprise by taking out mortgages and taking out loans, which he always repaid, which we have lots of documentation of. So the family, and it's interesting, they actually weren't even that interested in necessarily getting all of the land back. They wanted to have his story acknowledged, and they wanted to sort of, you know, reclaim their family as well. But they didn't, there was no, and they also, obviously they wanted to have the marker to their ancestor in town. But unfortunately, no, there was no sort of effort either on the part of the, you know, Abbeville or the current owners to repay or, you know, return the land to them.
I can also point out one little thing that you see in the film where Carol mentions the marker, which was put up, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's put up right next to the Confederate War Memorial.
Well, it's near. It's in the same part of
Not
town.
that far down, but that
Yeah.
large, tall obelisk in the center of town was the
Yeah.
Confederate War Dead Monument. So you had a very weird juxtaposition here.
I could tell you that I'd been working on the edit for the film for about a whole year until I actually got down to South Carolina, and I've been working on the edit, and I've been hearing 427 acres and stuff, but it wasn't until I went down there and I literally had to drive from one end of his property to another that it really like hit me and was really upsetting about the fact that the family does not get anything from this land. You know, it's crazy.
Well, I don't want to take over the
No.
conversation, but there's been so much talk about the loss that black families have had over generations.
Sure.
Because of the violence against
Right.
them, and especially against people who are successful. And, you know, the cumulative wealth
Right.
that they don't have access to.
Yeah.
And there's that piece of property.
That's-
That's one example.
Exactly, it's a huge example. I mean, you heard one of his granddaughters talked about how, you know, they were so successful, but then after the lynching and they had to flee to Philly, they had to be on welfare, you know, for that. So it's the whole concept of generational wealth that was cut off from them, and I think that's the biggest crime of it.
Well, that wasn't to be allowed, obviously. So.
Right.
You know,
Sure.
oh my God. Okay, right there.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about your film because as you were talking about it, I remembered my nephew went to what school was he in? He was in.
Which nephew?
In
Not USC.
Massachusetts.
Oh, MIT.
Yeah, MIT. There were a few suicides in MIT when he was there, and I'm wondering, is there something culturally in your school that kind of made it the right environment for this to happen? Did it get worse through the years? Is it what is it, or is it specific to your school, or is it across all schools now? Just curious what's happening that's causing this.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Unfortunately, there's an average number, right, for student deaths per year for universities, and for this year, the 2019-2020 year, there was 19 total, and that was definitely higher than average, but it wasn't much higher than average, which is a national tragedy in my opinion. And I think that like overall the number is representative of not only like the students that pass, but also the ripple effects that those losses cause. And something I learned while making the documentary is there's something called the suicide cluster, which is a phenomenon in just general human being cultures, where if there's like one suicide, then it's more likely exponentially to rise with each following suicide, that there's someone who's for lack of a better term, inspired by that action to follow through with their own negative thoughts. And so what we learned during the documentary is like, we were confused why the school wasn't communicating to us as a community, like, hey, there's this, because at the time, like when I was a student and this was happening, it felt like there was a death every week, like from the start, even from the beginning of that semester. It was like, who's going to die this week? Because it just felt like it was like this sort of slippery slope, this snowball effect, and we were really confused. So learning about that phenomenon, the suicide cluster, really helped me understand what this sort of chaotic environment was what was going on. But then also, I think just in general, the hyper-competitive nature of these institutions like USC sort of can be isolating, can be overwhelming for a lot of students. You know, like Edward's father was saying, it was a scary transition for him. And so if we can just sort of look at those issues and see what we as a community can do to be there for each other, to make those transitions more comfortable and more understandable, is really all we can do, and try to be there for each other.
And I think proactivity too, because there's some people that handle the transition well and some people that don't. And so that the people that are less equipped to handle the transition, if you can identify that beforehand, rather than institutionally making it easier for everyone, sort of, you know what I mean? So it's, again, but it's checking in, it's being aware,
Sure.
seems to be the thing. And yes, it's not necessarily inspiring, but this has been going on forever, is that suicide begets suicide begets suicide. And I think it's not only inspirational, I think it's a kind of permission. Yeah. It's a kind of, oh, somebody did it, there was success there. And he's not worrying about it, she's not worrying about it anymore. That's okay, it's okay for me too.
Yeah, and it was really kind of odd to learn that, because not all of the deaths that semester were suicides.
Right. I saw that one of them was, at least one was a car accident, one something else.
Yeah. So, you know, it's really just something to keep your eye on and be aware of.
Absolutely. I think we have one more question, I think, and we're done.
About the support groups, why was there not better support from USC? And would this film perhaps make them more aware that they need to support the students? They reached out once, and
Yeah, it's very angry. It's very angering for me because those were my friends and they were totally let down by the institution that was supposed to help protect them and keep them safe. But yeah, I think before we made this film, there was little to no kind of conversation about mental health. They had the Trojans for Trojans program, which was like kind of just like a general check-in. And there were counselors available. Like Sydney talked about the lack of diverse counselors. She needed someone who was Black to be there to talk about those issues. And I think after making this documentary, it's sort of like, oh, we're talking about this, and we're either going to like do something about it. And I think they're actually implementing, counselors. But there are still, people at the school who just don't see it as an issue, and so this documentary hopefully opened their eyes to that. Like Tyler was saying at the end, we need to make people aware who unconsciously make us feel like we're alone in this.
Well, great job on both your parts to bring us more awareness about this and beautiful films.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.